I'd like to use a phrase that you had said about the media being a bought priesthood. Would you consider any media agencies worse than others in this country?
I have to give credit where credit is due. It's not my phrase. It comes from the labor press. As late, it's hard to remember, but as late as the 1950s, there was still a vigorous labor press in the United States. I think maybe 800 newspapers reaching tens of millions of people a week. And one of the things that they did was condemn what they called the bought priesthood, the major media, and set up an alternative to it. And yeah, there made sense. Are there differences? Differences. Fox News, for example, is just right inside corporate pockets. They don't pretend to be anywhere else. And one of the best economists around, Dean Baker, regularly refers to the Washington Post as Fox on 15th. 15th Street is where their offices are.
You also mentioned Kennedy. His speech at the Dakota Hotel, I believe it was, where he was admonishing the press, the members of the media, about the secret societies, too strong of a central bank, etc., and which, of course, 5 days later he was assassinated. I'm not going to get into conspiracy theory here, but do you know of any of the media taking him up on that? Do you know anybody that actually did? Did any of those media members present at that speech?
I don't remember the speech, but I don't even understand what it amounts to. There's just no question that you need a central bank. The question is, what kind should you have? There's a European central bank, which is committed solely to inflation control. It works only for the investor class. The Federal Reserve is different. It has two missions: inflation control and reduction of unemployment. Now, it doesn't actually fulfill those two missions, but the fact that it has those two missions is quite significant. And it does things that the European Central Bank doesn't. So, you could say, let's just not have a central bank at all and put everything in the hands of Goldman Sachs and JP Morgan Chase, completely uncontrolled. Yeah, it'd be much worse.
How would you suggest better, supervision or control over these?
Very straightforward. The New Deal regulations were pretty decent. They were in place for about 30 years. During the time the New Deal regulations were in control, there wasn't a single financial crisis. In the 1970s, the move towards financialization of the economy and deregulation set off changes. And since then, there's been regular financial crises. If you deregulate, of course, there's a combination of deregulation and a government insurance policy for the banks, what's called too big to fail. Starts under Reagan, and you have a combination of deregulation, which encourages risk, the insurance policy, which magnifies the encouragement of risk. Of course, you're going to get failures. Notice that a lot of these failures are just part of a market system, period. In a market system, there's a well-known inefficiency. You study it in the first semester of an economics class. It's called ignoring externalities. Like if you and I make a transaction, we don't pay attention to what it costs him. It may, like if you sell me a car, it costs him. There's more pollution, more congestion, but we don't take that into account. When Goldman Sachs makes a transaction, if they're paying attention, they cover their own risks, but they don't cover what's called systemic risk, the risk that if something happens to them, the whole system will crash. That's inherent in market systems, and it guarantees underpricing of risk, and hence guarantees financial crises. And unless you have a regulatory apparatus, that's going to happen. So yes, when you dismantle the regulatory apparatus, that's what happens. It became worse at the end of the Clinton years when they dismantled Glass-Steagall, and yes, of course, that just set off the run to the races.
Right.